Welcome to the Homebody podcast. Thanks for joining me this week. This is kind of our first episode that I'm putting out on YouTube, in addition to having it available on an audio platform. So that is exciting. It's also new for me and a little bit, but thank you for being here. So the normal trajectory of a solo episode is I often spend most of the time talking about astrological transits or jumping in and out of other topics. And before we jump into the episode today, I would love to say two things. Could you take 10 seconds to leave the podcast a 5-star rating or review? It is totally free. It helps the podcast so much. And if it's something that you've been enjoying, that is just such a small and very practical way that you can support the show. And also feel free to share. If this is not your favorite episode, you don't have to share this one. But if there's one that's really landed for you in a potent way, then share that one. Those are just really free and small gestures that really do collectively make a big impact on the show and the sustainability of it. Speaking of free, always be sure to check out the show notes. There are links to everything that I mention in the episode, usually, or as much as I can track down. And there's always a section devoted purely to things that you can get for free. And I'm always trying to think of things I can add to that pile. So scope out the show notes, gift yourself some accessible goodies that are of interest to you. And speaking of those, the prompts for the transits for March are now live. So you can get those. They help you sort of get a lay of the land for the major transits happening within a month and help you become aware of them in a more reflective and personal way than just the logistics of what the transits are. So if you don't already get those in your inbox, be sure to head below and get those. And today, what I'm going to talk about is I'll briefly talk about Mars just moved into Gemini, which happened last night as of the release of this episode. And then I'm also going to take a brief look at the Sun conjunct Neptune and Mercury's conjunction with Jupiter. I was like, what day is it? And then we're going to take a deep dive into some things that just really landed themselves like a spaceship into my awareness this past week that really felt important and timely, at least for me, the way things kind of bubble up and it feels like it's ready for right now. I'm talking a little bit about aliens and telepathic communication and music and what do these things even mean for us about life and what we're doing here. So to kick it off with the transits, we're taught Mars has entered Gemini as of last night on March 3rd, around 10:30 in the evening, at least here on Eastern time. And so we had Mars in Taurus for a long time. And so this transition into a new sign is closing out a rather long story, actually, where we had Mars and Saturn sort of sitting at odds with each other for a long time. Since the end of June of last year, actually, they've been in this ongoing square relationship, which is one of conflict and tension, kind of with varying degrees of intensity throughout that period. So Mars moving into Gemini sort of closes out that chapter because now they'll be moving into a more symbiotic relationship in these signs where they will help each other or have a sense of flow between them. And I sort of see Saturn here as like the disciplinary eye that's going to help Mars and Gemini try to be focused and to see things through, which it will likely have a hard time doing just because these are not Gemini's strengths. So as Mars moves through this sign, I think they will potentially try to do a lot at once, take in a lot at once, and even to the point of feeling overwhelmed or confused or anxious even, because Mars in this sign tends towards a lot of unfocused energy and decision-making and actions. So before we go shooting arrows all over the place because we're feeling energized at first, I think taking the time to aim, gather your focus and attention to sort of help you make a map for the month, for your energy, for your decisions that you can return to throughout the month could be really helpful to help you like organize yourself and sort of regroup when things start to feel too scattered. Mercury rules Gemini, so Mercury is like hosting Mars, so to speak. And so this sign by definition is really interested in communication and ideas and curiosity, and Mars will be adding their flavor to this, which may have some of the messaging that we're interacting with a bit more martial, more accelerated, and more pointed speech, so to speak. So I think that this transit will ask us to be agile and adaptive with how we are moving and pointing our communication and our plans. And it will be consistently inconsistent, probably. And it may require ongoing practices of grounding or collecting ourselves and kind of coming back to task or whatever our orientation is. And then the following day, which is today, if you're watching this when it comes out, is Thursday, March 4th at 10:30 in the evening. Mercury is going to conjunct Jupiter in Aquarius. So Mercury already did this once. Mercury retrograded over Jupiter again. And now this is the final and third pass for this particular segment in time. So this sort of boosts Mercury and expands Mercury's agenda for this moment. So Jupiter can sort of help provide big picture solutions to Mercury's information or request and help Mercury's final untangling process end on a more optimistic, constructive note with perhaps some grand promises or some helpful information or some beneficial news from the kings, potentially, is how like thinking of messengers coming out from the king that's like being communicated, that is good news for the male or from the males. On Wednesday, March 10th at around 7 p.m., the sun will conjunct Neptune, and they're both currently in Pisces. So it's a very watery moment and week, or a few couple of days that we're headed into. So Saturday, March 13th, there's a new moon in Pisces. And for me, on the 10th of March, when we have the sun and Neptune coming together, it really is like the beginning of this very watery weekend that will be kicking off. So Neptune tends to blur our attachment to the material world and also our definitions of the material world. And this could go a few different ways, which I feel like I'm always saying with Neptune, like it could go this way, it could also go this way, which makes sense. It could be sort of like fun and enlightening and a sense of like having an opportunity for transcendental or creative or spiritual experiences. Or it could also leave us feeling potentially like rather ungrounded or prone to escapism or feeling disillusioned. So I think, if we experience it in a constructive way, it can grant us some access to the mystical or to the imaginal or the creative, a sense of a deeper understanding of our spiritual identities and connected to maybe more nebulous ideas about who we are. I will pick up more about the new moon in Pisces in next week's episode, because for now, I want to jump into this other wave that sort of feels like a stork dropped it on my head last week, and I just want to talk about it with you. Before I jump into this, I do want to acknowledge that this sort of all just felt like it kind of swarmed around me all at once the other evening, which I love when that happens. But of course, we're always seeding ideas from what is in the air, the conversations and the people around us. So I do want to acknowledge some of the folks who I really feel like they felt kind of present in this assimilation. None of this synthesis is theirs that I know about. And I'm not saying that they would necessarily like agree all the way or be a fan of it, but these are some of the swimming pools that I've been in of conversation lately, and so some inspiration is no doubt coming from there. I just want to acknowledge Carl Sagan and Maria Popova, Peter Gray, Dr. Zach Bush, and my new friend Michelle. I feel like these are some conversations that really kind of helped coalesce some of these ideas for me, even though this is not what we were talking about really. So most of this is a juxtaposition around the importance of sound or the value of sound, and also thinking about expanding our framework around how we think about life or intelligence beyond this planet. I also want to acknowledge that it feels important to say that I am not necessarily a huge sci-fi fan. I don't live for it in any sort of like obsessive way. Not that sci-fi fans are obsessive, but I feel like there's a category or some characteristics of them, and I'm not always just swimming in that deep end. I'm not always talking about aliens. It's not something that I'm prone to think about, if ever. I appreciate good fantasy and sci-fi when it helps us understand like complex ideas or essential artifacts of the human condition, or to help like kind of propose new ways of imagining what our world could look like. And I think it can be really helpful with those things. And the destination of this little talk is not going to be aliens, but I do want to start there because that was sort of how like it provoked me to want to assimilate some things. And that's what provoked some of these thoughts coming together. So at least when I think about aliens or extraterrestrial life, it's sort of, I jump to images from the movie Alien or Men in Black or Star Wars or, this alien message of like, we come in peace, and some like robotic synthesized voice. And so I think it could be helpful to substitute words for like extraterrestrial or interstellar beings, which for me feels better. I historically think of the possibility of these kinds of beings as something that's really like separate from me, not something that I think about, and it feels a little too spacey for someone like me who likes to live in the forest. So, but I want to take a moment to talk about it for the sake of learning a little bit more about listening. If we think of ourselves as surrounded by a wider intelligence or a higher intelligence or consciousness, so to speak, which I know many of you listeners do, I do, it isn't really that far of a stretch to think of beings who exist in extended realms of space who could potentially, know that we are here and want to communicate with us, to bring a message or messages. And so it's with this language we actually see that it is similar to how we often talk about guides or ancestors or individual spirits or deities or daimons, energies that we are actually more comfortable, at least in more mystical spaces, potentially being in communication with, or we're more familiar with thinking about. And somehow for me, sort of adding these under an umbrella of like extraterrestrial beings kind of makes the idea that we generally call like life out there, like life out in space, it feels a little less far-fetched to those who are used to thinking of the mystical when we think of it as just interstellar or extraterrestrial, at least for me, because all of these other things that we're more comfortable talking about or talking with can also live under that definition. And it reminded me of a movie called Arrival, which came out in 2016, and it was based on a story by Ted Chiang called Story of Your Life, which if you haven't watched the movie, I would recommend it. It is about aliens landing, but it's actually about language and time and how these extraterrestrial beings come to Earth to sort of unlock a new understanding of that. And I often these days find myself caught with so many longings and heartbreaks for the world that there is something in me that wants these aliens to land. I heard someone mention how, like, if they really made their presence known, our relationship to reality would totally change. Our relationship to ourselves, to the planet, would change instantly. And it really, thinking about that kind of made me wish that they would come, what problems that could solve. Because we do have a limited time within which we need to make some radical changes as a creature on this planet if we would like to see life as we know it continue. But maybe those beings don't have to come. Maybe they're already here, hovering, listening, watching, communicating. But we have these preconceived notions or ideas about what landing looks like or about what communication looks like. Culturally, we're really used to communication that is also marketing. It's like we're always being sold to in some way, so that a lot of our collective senses are really dulled down if someone's not just like radically selling us something. And we've sort of, as a culture, lost an awareness of more subtle communication. And so what if the extraterrestrial beings don't have to come? What if they're already here? And maybe they're not arriving here on a spaceship because we're already on a spaceship, which reminds me of the episode from 2 weeks ago where I really talked about that. And so when would they communicate with us? Why? How? And how would they be trying to get to us or speak to us or deliver the messages that we would need to hear in this moment? And I just recently watched a documentary on Netflix that was on the Bee Gees, which was really random for me, but lots of folks recommended it, so I finally caved, and I actually ended up enjoying it, which surprised me. But one of them said something that really stuck out to me, and they said something along the lines that music is just there. Music is everywhere. Music is out there, and you just sort of reach out and catch it. And that's something I relate to, like within my process as an artist, that you know, there's this sense that like something is coming through you, and it's already out there, and you can see it coming, and you're merely just catching it. And the artist's job is sort of just to like recognize it into form. It's already there. It's like catching music from the ethers, and what is in the ether changes. And you know, I think astrology also is one of the many ways that we try to think about the changing of the ethers and understanding what's in the air, so to speak. And we have words for these things of catching some, like zeitgeist, like this, which means the spirit of an era or the ghost of a certain time, or this ineffable expression of a certain moment. Well, like when suddenly a bunch of songs or poems come out around a certain topic or thinking about something, or a lot of books come out and they are really unpackaging, you know, X, Y, and Z. Some of it is marketing, I'm sure. But what if we could think about it outside of these more human constructions and really get to the root of it? How are the musicians catching it? Not the fake artists, not the people who are just commodifying the shit out of everything that they look at, but the people who are really catching it. The poets, the artists, usually the folks who are less concerned with how popular they are and are more concerned about how true the work is, how authentic the expression feels. How are they catching it? And how does the ether communicate? And if the extraterrestrial is all around us on this spaceship with us, the spaceship of Earth, how are they communicating? And it really lands for me that it's sound, and it's vibration, and it's frequency. And then I thought of Carl Sagan and Andrean's Golden Record Project, where they put a bunch of like music and poetry sound onto a golden record and sent it out into space in case anyone was listening, and in case someone found it or something found it. You know, what would we want them to know about being human? What would we want them to know about us, about our life here on Earth? And it brings up questions about like what could be decoded or translated beyond actual words. If our words wouldn't work really in that situation, what could potentially translate through space, which is also time? What communicates beyond our human encoded language and ideas? And it's sound, it's vibration, it's frequency, and ways we can communicate that are less reliant upon the words, because words can lie, but vibrations do not. Frequencies do not. They are what they are. They are as they are. And if you have a practice through which you channel or intuit or serve as a medium or conduit in some way, at least in my experience, that you'll understand that it can sometimes feel like a disconnect between what makes sense in my language and my way of knowing the world and what makes sense on the other end of that telephone. And we feel this in our everyday often too sometimes, especially folks who are sensitive, right? We feel something about someone's character, perhaps that they are untrustworthy or that they don't mean what they say. But then we bypass that and we just listen to their words. We're like, oh no, their words said that they were X, Y, and Z, so it must be true. But words can lie and frequency does not. And they're not necessarily the same thing. It can happen the other way too, where potentially someone says something that we think is questionable, but then we feel like there's someone that we can trust and we go for that. And so I think there is a call here to become more refined in how we are listening and what we are listening to increase our subtle expression and our ability to communicate subtly. Like, who in the culture is listening in these ways? Is it the intuitives and the psychics and the artists? Is it the meditators, the mages? It's those, whoever it is, they may not fit neatly into a box. It's those who can listen into the silence and know that it's not emptiness. What is telepathy but a transfer of energy, which is vibration, which is current, and it's not actually spoken through the mouth, but it's communicated in some other way via some other means. And I think of all the songs, all the singing and the chanting, or the language traditions where words only have vibrational value, like Sanskrit. or when we use the voice as an instrument as opposed to just what the words it can say. Think about how the vagus nerve, the nerve in our gut, literally tones when we sing. And so instead of the voice always talking about something, what if the voice is something? And there are things that can only be communicated without our words or beyond our words. And I think, and this is speaking mostly of overculture, which may or may not, it all affects us to varying degrees. But culturally and habitually, we're tuned into so many other things, right? Like, especially in America right now. And I know all of you don't live in America, but it's where I am. We're so worried and we're so concerned about like policing other people's language and controlling people's compliance to our agendas that I think we are missing a lot of what is actually happening, or what could actually be possible if we invested in different priorities. What if we didn't just listen to words, but if we listened to the sound, to the frequency, to the vibration, which is more important to listen to, which is inescapably honest. And I think it will be this connection to the subtle and this ability to communicate via this way that is imperative to interject onto how the world is going. I think it will take magic to remake the world, to make this idea of this regenerative, beautiful earth. We're on a path right now where magic, the unseen, the vibration of existence is the nexus of future communication, which is why I built Kin, which is why I'm so invested in these tools and like bringing them together and talking about them. And because we need to become fluent in these silent languages. It becomes necessary to communicate interstellarly in order to survive, in the subtlety, in the simultaneity, in the frequency, and in the sound of it. Listening is really imperative. And I say that a lot, but now I think I know more about what I mean, right? Listening is imperative, but we're not listening about something. We are listening to something. Not the words, but the sound and the vibration and the frequency. Learning the language of the silent and the subtle and the sounds and the stars so that we can think about our alignment, or not, I don't even want to say that, so we can understand our alignment, our true place, so that we can be more aligned with what is instead of what we think about what is. And more connected to the alignment of life and flourishing in the planet that we are on. And thinking about the Golden Record Project, if I were an extraterrestrial intelligence, which maybe I am, what would I need to listen to? What would I want to make? What did Carl and Anne put on their record, right? Music, voices, brainwaves, heartbeats, poems, people reading, right? Thinking about the movie Arrival again, who did they send out to the spaceship to meet the aliens when they landed? Who was the ambassador? They didn't send the scientist, they sent the linguist. They sent the student of sound, of listening and translation, not the politicians, not the generals. In fact, they were actively the problem, surprise, surprise, enacting war and war mindsets when what was called for was listening and patience. And they come in peace. The world comes in peace. It is we who make war, and we make war against the world who comes in peace. What is needed is the translation of the ineffable that makes our human experience more beautiful and vast, and it expands our sense of consciousness. Because what if they are not coming, but what if they are already here? Our humanity is not a matter of state, but it is a matter of spirit, something in earth, something that cannot be captured, but it can be whispered, I think, through silence, through the wind, through poems, through shapes, through colors. Like, what is our way that we listen to the ineffable? How do we translate it into our lives and into our imaginations? How do we translate the ineffable into our futures? And we call it an intuitive sense that has only special people have access to these truths. Not that being intuitive is special. I don't think it is, because it's really who we are. And it is a life sense that has access to that kind of communication. Everything that is alive has it. And also beings that are alive elsewhere or somewhere else, or not necessarily alive in the way that we understand it. But this trans-species communication, this interstellar communication, and it makes me think that like astrology itself is a form of interstellar communication, whether it's via aliens or ancestors or guides or spirits of trees and whales and birds. What are we listening to, and who are we listening to? These are the waves. These are the vibrations, the frequencies of sound. It's a listening below the din, as Mary Ruffel says, in order to hear the messages for the paths that could help us unlock this massive extinction moment that we are in, to breathe the peace back into our veins lost from somewhere, to readjust our realities back into life instead of against life. The higher intelligence or the wider intelligence that we're surrounded by, whether or not some take a vehicle or a form that lands here on Earth, it is around us. And I want to be the necessary poet who gets to go into the spaceship and be the ambassador and receive the revelation. I want to hear the messages that they are teaching us about life, about who we are, and how we could continue should we make the collective choices that are necessary to do that. And this brink, this moment that we're in, this is when the interstellar makes a landing, or the angels show up and say, "Hark, do not be afraid." It's these kinds of moments. It's this moment we are listening. We must train our ears. They don't have to land. What if they're already here? The numbers for continued human life on planet Earth for the next 50 to 60 years are not currently looking that great. And the answer is not more chemicals, more genetic modifications, more artificial injections. The answer is not better pesticides or sucking carbon out of the air via technology. It is about aligning with the blueprint for life on this planet, period. And we will either align with life or we will not. As a culture, we can continue to choose to exist within products and systems and sanitizers and structures and philosophies that are anti-life. And if we do that, then the less life there will be. And that is how it works. We're in a Promethean moment, that Uranian moment that I talked about in the episode on talking about Saturn and Uranus squares, right? And I've been saying for years now, and I'm sure others have too, because it's in the ether, that it's not enough to resist. We must also create. Our evolution and our survival is now demanding that we evolve into this subtle ability, into this subtle listening, so that we can hear. Your listening is creative. It's not passive. Your vibrational interactions and movements, they have an effect. Our actions and alignments must get more subtle. And we have to act like this is true because we know it's true, right? Act like you're a mage, act like a wizard, and that you have the power to turn lead into gold. It's not too out there, right? We're on a pale blue dot floating through space. We're on a spaceship right now, a fleck of dust in a sunbeam, as Carl Sagan says. It's not too out there. We're already there, right? And they are already here. So what is the sound we are sending? What is our own personal golden record that we're sending out into space? What are the waves that we are catching? The waves that we're making? What are we listening for? Because they're always emanating and they're always exchanging. It's like casting your net into this Piscean ocean of space where we must learn to swim. Whatever you make, do it with art and with magic, which is where our listening converges with creativity and transformation. Treat your life as art, as magic, as something that is truly stellar and vibrational and has an effect. Most of us act like our lives don't matter and that what we do doesn't matter, but it does. And after the fall of empires from their own self-destruction, what will we have made which is truly lasting? It's not our buildings, probably, but perhaps it is our magic, which is our listening and our response to our listening. Perhaps that is what will outlast the fall of empires. The answers are all around us, showing us how life can be if we choose to be a part of it. What do trees do when they get sick? What do trees do when they die? What do whales do for food and for relationship? We're not unlike them, right? We should be following them. That is, in fact, where we got lost. We're on their planet, not the other way around. And I think all of our current problems stem from this separation from the force of life. And so our solutions must be in mending that fissure, or we truly have numbered days. We must live like trees, like whales. We must speak like them. We must listen like them, and we must listen to them, because these are our solutions. Wildness is who we are. Wildness is who we listen to, and it is how we listen. Our wildness is our interconnectedness, as Dr. Vandana Shiva says, and we return to it. Let it call to you. And if you don't know how, then immerse yourself in that which is wild. It wants to teach you. They are singing or sounding to you all the time, but we just have to stop talking. And we have to start vibrating. And we have to start singing and listening, right? Like, let the uncivilized waters wash over you. Find a way to stand naked outside, howl into the darkness of outer space, and just listen for the silence that is not empty, that comes back to you. Because we are the ones that we've been waiting for. The beings are already here, and they come in peace.